Let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes in the importance of
What is that process that a developer, or let's say,
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed?
Welcome to In the Clouds. I'm your host, Stu Miniman, and I'm coming to you from our Boston office, Red Hat's Global Briefing Center in the Boston Seaport District, and I'm wearing what I call my cloud blue, and the reason I'm doing that is I'm really happy to welcome to the program someone I've known for many years. I got the chance to interview once in my previous life, and that is David Linthicum, who is the Chief Cloud Strategy Officer with Deloitte. David, it is great to see you. You're in your home studio there in the DC area. You and I know each other back from, the early days of cloud, the whole clouderati and things like that. And we've both changed jobs a couple of times in those years. And great to see you. How are you?
It's great. It's great to see you, and it's great to be here, Stu. I'm just happy that we're working together again. I always like chatting with you.
So for our audience that doesn't know you, if you could just give us kind of the quick thumbnail, the journey you've been on, how you've helped customers in various roles in their, understanding and, grappling with cloud and what you're doing these days.
Yeah, I've been actually with cloud as a concept for a long time, actually since the late 90s. I always saw the opportunity for us to consume things that we normally would consume from data centers, over in the open internet in a shareable way. So got into integration as a service early on, and kicked off a company that did that, and then got into software as a service integration and those sorts of things, and really kind of held on for dear life why no one cared. I think I got walked to the end of properties and many times and hung up on, and ultimately I think people didn't really kind of understand the value of doing this. But you think about it, we're sharing resources and sharing infrastructure, and do so in more optimized ways is kind of the way to go. And enterprises who really kind of participated in that in the early days, I think we're above some of the other ones that exist today. So did a lot of thought leadership on what cloud computing means, so, morphing service-oriented architecture into cloud computing, how this kind of trickles down into particular enterprises, focusing on architectural patterns, and, really kind of getting into the deep aspects of what cloud computing is. And that's what I do at my role at Deloitte. I look for where the ball is going to be kicked and where the technology is moving, and make sure we're aligned to make that happen.
Awesome. Yeah, and let's connect to the discussion of Deloitte. So we've come a long way on clouds. The early days it was, oh well, hey, it's going to be cheap and easy to use this stuff. When I talk to customers today, there is nothing simple about the deployment. There's a lot of complexity, and it's companies like Deloitte that are helping customers through, hey, where I've been and where I need to go. This journey, this transformation we often talk about is a complex thing, and it's what you and I are going to spend some time talking about today, is some real-world examples. These weren't things that just take a couple of weeks. Sometimes you get some initial results there, but the real blocking and tackling work. So at Deloitte, the role that you're involved in, give us that next layer down, how you're involved in, connect to, where Red Hat ties into that.
Yeah, well, we're looking at, say 3 to 5 years ahead of where the technology is going. So we're doing the normal consulting things today, doing migration and ops planning and security planning and all the things that have to go with blocking and tackling and making cloud computing work. But it's also good to have an eye on the next destination for what problems we're looking to solve. And obviously cloud complexity, came on our radar screen, probably 7 years ago, as we kind of saw the adoption of multi-cloud being an inevitable reality, getting into these very complex cloud computing architectures, and ultimately the ability to kind of put together what that means, different technological stacks, really kind of moving things into their proper place, and understanding that cloud ultimately and multi-cloud is not going to be necessarily about cloud. It's going to be about your ability to, in essence, build things in between the various cloud providers to take things to the next level. So instead of doing things redundant, in other words, having different security stacks on each different cloud deployment, the ability to rise that up into a unified layer of cross-cloud services and then manage things from that area. In other words, manage operations, managing security, manage governance, manage data management, database operations, all these sorts of things that we have a tendency to kind of do in our little silos, abstracting those up into some sort of a common services, and then it's defining what those are. And people are calling the super cloud, the meta cloud, things like that. But at the end of the day, they want to know what's in that stack, how do they solve the problems, how do they plan for these moving forward, and that's where we're focused on today.
Yeah, and for any of our audience, if you haven't heard the term meta cloud or super cloud, if you go do a Google search and search for David, you'll find some writings that he's done on it. He did a video interview with my old crew, my friends at theCUBE. If I remember right, the title of the session was Meta Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. And I'm proud of myself for being able to say that right the first time. But an interesting term, something that I found interesting being at Red Hat is some of those pieces are things that we have tried to do for many years. So, our environment with just what we've done with Linux is the discussion we had with customers for many years is having a standard operating environment. So Linux is going to live everywhere. It does live everywhere. It's in your data center. It's in the public cloud. It's going out to the edge. So if you standardize on Red Hat Linux for that, there's certain things that you do. And OpenShift has helped us raise that even further. So let's talk about some of those customers. What I love at Red Hat, we have lots of customers that use OpenShift. Many of them talk publicly. We have a program called the Innovation Award Winners, and a couple of the ones I think we're talking about have even been Innovation Award winners, and it's been Deloitte, the customer, and Red Hat working together to do some pretty phenomenal things. So David, the first one I believe is out of Washington State, the Health Benefit Exchange. If we can start there, help us understand their cloud story and what they did that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, basically, as a healthcare provider, they really were looking for what a lot of customers look at for seamless, uninterruptible access to affordable healthcare systems. And they were using some core technology to build it. So they had an eligibility enrollment application that they're building. And they were able to leverage 3Scale to create a system that scales automatically, reduce memory footprint. And in essence, they're able to provide Washingtonians, Washington State residents, not people who live around me, ways to identify and locate and select best elsewhere dental care plan and providers to meet the family's needs and optimize. 34,000 customers are able to find the coverage that they need through this very seamless and flexible system. So ultimately, the price has dropped and how they do it. The premiums have dropped. They're able to provide the savings right back to the customers via this technology. And this is really where we're getting into leveraging technology as a force multiplier to make things better. So, this was a combination of the Red Hat technology and folks at Deloitte doing the architecture to really kind of take things to the next level and get to a point where we're able to weaponize technology to, in essence, provide a value to the customers, in this case, better, cheaper, and easier to obtain healthcare coverage.
Yeah, that's awesome. We always love those stories of kind of tech for good and helping. There's been a lot of them over the pandemic. I talked to a lot of Amazon customers that did fast implementation. A couple of things that really jumped out to me in reviewing this one is, number one, automation was a key to what they were doing. It is one of those things that often gets thought of after. In so much of my career, it was automation after the fact or automating certain pieces of it. And we need to, as an industry, think of more automation everywhere. It needs to be part of our practices. Kubernetes, by design, can really leverage a lot of automation. And when you talk about more adoption of healthcare, it was, number one, that they actually got to reduce their costs a lot and have the adoption of the platform go through the roof. So any comments on that?
Yeah, it was what was jumped off the charts to me when I was looking at this as a solution is the fact of the matter is that we're able to in essence, bring automation closer to the customer. So if we're getting into digital enablement, digital transformation, this is about putting the customer at the center of the universe. In this case, we're able to take technology that Red Hat built, and allow us to create an environment and create an experience that's going to be a great deal more helpful to the customer ultimately. And let's face it, I mean, trying to find a healthcare plan and your ability to kind of find the right one that's going to meet your particular needs, unless you have lots of help, it's not necessarily going to be a great experience. And this thing, what jumped out is that we turned this into a great experience, leveraging your technology, and really kind of took the way the system should operate to the next level. So again, full weaponization of technology, providing automation, providing smaller footprints in terms of how we're able to weaponize technology and take things to the next level. So this is a shining example of what we can do with technology in general if the right architecture is applied and we're able to solve the business problem directly, this is an instance of that.
All right, so you live outside of DC, and we're talking about public sector customers here. So one of the hurdles often for technology is you've got certain certifications that you need to meet. If you're talking about the cloud, there's the government cloud type of environment. So the last thing I wanted to talk about for this customer is they're using Azure, it's GovCloud, and they needed to make sure that there was Fedramp certifications. These were not trivial issues. We've been working with Azure for a number of years, so I know it needs to be table stakes for your government customers, but how do we make sure that we meet all of those requirements that these agencies need to fit?
Yeah, the main thing is understanding what those requirements are ahead of the time, which I find that sometimes architecture teams can be neglectful in doing. So in other words, if we're moving in this direction, we're going to have certain security requirements, but also architectural requirements and different things we need to leverage in the stack and different certification programs that we need to go through. It's just really kind of figuring out what those are ahead of time so we can bake them into the plan before we start picking technology. In many instances, a lot of times we'll get to the final stages, and that's where people will start swapping in and swapping out different technologies based on their understanding of how they're compliant with a certain industry standard, in this case, the government standard. And that's something that you need to kind of focus on. So you need experienced teams. That's what we do at Deloitte. And you need technology that's able to adapt to those particular compliance teams. In other words, it's a team effort. One thing, if you go in there understanding compliance and what it's able to do, that's one problem you're looking to solve. You have to have the actual technology that's able to adapt around those policies and deal with compliance. And it's a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of scenario. In many instances, they'll miss that. In other words, they'll use technology that doesn't understand how to deal with compliance, and therefore they have to make a lot of customization or reject technology moving forward. And ultimately, this is a fairly easy problem to solve, but planning occurs. And that's kind of a core message of all this. If you put enough planning into the technology deployment and understanding the business requirements, you're going to succeed. If you don't, you're not.
Awesome. Well stated. Yeah, it's a great example. As I said, we've partnered with Azure for a whole number of years. The Azure Red Hat OpenShift or Arrow solution is one that I've really enjoyed working with customers on. We're going to switch to a different cloud, and we're going to go across the pond for another interesting one. So over in the UK, it's the Department of Work and Pensions, or DWP. My understanding, an AWS customer. So I guess, to set it up first, David, Deloitte, you work with all the clouds. The multi-cloud and super cloud. I mean, one of the biggest challenges is, while some of at a high level and a marketing standpoint, many of the clouds are the same. I mean, it's not like we have a universal dial tone or, there were some discussions years back as to I should have, a cloud concierge. I should be able to just plug from one cloud to the other and make it seamless. The way they're built, the way they're used, the services underneath, everything's a little bit different. So, what role does Deloitte play there? And then, let's get into the DWP customer study.
Yeah, it's a matter of understanding what fits and what doesn't, and using these technologies. So if you're looking at how cloud computing is able to be applicable in these spaces, we have to consider a couple of things. Number one, the security profile, the business profile, the problems we're able to solve, and the scalability issues, and the ability to do these things and operate these systems. So if you look at that and really kind of look at that first, you're going to end up with a solution that's going to be able to scale. I mean, one of the great things about this case study we're going to talk about is ultimately this was about scalability. They had some pressures that they ran into in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, where scalability was going to be the ultimate success. And the alternative is you're not able to serve your customers, not able to serve your patients, you're not able to take things to the next level. And that was obviously an option that was off the table. So going in there and understanding that, and understand that we're going to have to build for cloud scale architectures, is a different beast in how we move things forward. And I think that that was something that the architecture team understood, and obviously leveraging great technology, being the Red Hat technology, to kind of take things to the next level.
Yeah, it is one of those things. You think about having infinite capacity in the cloud, but the reality is sometimes we run into some issues. Amazon, to their credit, has done a really good job. Azure, during the pandemic, they prioritized certain customers and had said certain things. Hey, you might not have the on-demand capacity at the time you need it because there was just such an increased demand for growth there. You look at Google out there, of course, knows how to scale. They've been doing this, have phenomenal networking. So interesting challenge. It's one of the things that is beyond the control of what we do. We sit on top of these, but you kind of hope when you call and you say, okay, I need to expand a cluster and do things, that the technology's there. So you talked about scalability being a key thing. So tell us a little bit more about the DWP story. And I think we're putting in the chat a link to tell a little bit more about it.
Yeah, check it out. And we're going to have a link to the chat to all of these case studies. And there really are, they're good because they're not just looking at the technology solution, which I think is important, but really kind of the business, problems that they overcome with technology, which I think is a more of an important story. So they received almost 2 million new claims to Universal Credit over and over again. 200,000 job seek allowances and backgrounds, were implemented and automated integration. And so they had a scalability issue. And so needed to support these additional claims, the claims that came in, and do so in a pandemic and do so in a remote environment where people weren't able to come into a particular office or into a particular kiosk to make things happen. They had to do this 100% at home. And so they were able to go through a couple of transformations. Number one, they transformed their technology to handle the scalability. In this case, 2 million new claims, that's huge. And over $200,000 of job seek allowances that they needed to process, but they changed their culture. And so this is one of those instances where we're not just talking about changing the technology and becoming more scalable and more clever with the technology moving forward, but getting to the core cultural changes that I believe are probably more important than any technological changes. So they knew that this was something that was going to be able to take their business to the next level. And so they went through a cultural shift. And by the way, doing so remotely, is almost an impossible feat, but there's many companies, including a lot of our client companies, that made this happen. And what they said was, we're going to incentivize the people on our team to get the additional training, to get the additional incentives, and build a structure that's going to be flat enough so they're able to externalize a lot of these different issues and solve them with technology. In many instances, we find people had cultures of more, I would say, fear, where they weren't bringing up these issues. And so in other words, there were core architectural teams that were working on the problem, and sometimes they work and sometimes they didn't. And the people who are operating these systems didn't externalize any of the troubles. This is an example where they did do that. So in other words, everybody has ownership of the particular systems. They have ownership of the process. They have ownership of what technologies that you're going to leverage. They have ownership of the customers and their ability to be satisfied. Everybody took ownership in this case. So it was the ability to weaponize technology again, the ability to work with Deloitte, work with Red Hat, different technological solutions to make this happen. But the most important thing here, and this is why I'm proud of them as a client, is they shifted their culture, which is almost an impossibility, and in many of the larger companies out there. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, David, I love this one too, and it's one of the reasons we wanted to highlight it, because I've met with many customers that were like, hey, we built some awesome, cool system, and we gave it a great name, and here's architecturally what we built. But this group, which they originally called the Emerging Platforms Team, and eventually they end up just calling it the Purple Team. And as you said, that cultural shift is so tough. We've seen so many times where, top down, we're going to implement some new technology. I mean, I know you spent many years fighting okay, C-suite said do cloud. Somebody down below needs to go implement cloud and hopefully get the buy-in. Is it an unfunded mandate? Do I figure out the cost? There's so many issues that can run into it. And we see so many cases that if you look at two companies that are involved that look to have the same commitment and they have similar architecture, but how do you get that buy-in? Because, you said something like everybody was bought in. That's really tough. It's much easier to be like, hey, let's get a small group and let's do, a cloud center of excellence and then, hub and spoke and, roll that out through a company. But, it's nice when people get excited and get invested in it because these are our jobs that we're working on. If we, people often, I want to make that change. You said, right. It's it's 200 billion pounds a year that they deliver to the people of the United Kingdoms. That's really important work. You don't want people not being able to eat, and things like that. So it's great to see them embrace this, allow technology to be the driver of, the results. And, I'm sure they're excited with, we're part of driving that change. So, it's phenomenal to see some of those things. And, how does Deloitte help with that? Because, when I looked in there, it's like, oh, hey, they're doing awesome things like CI/CD and GitOps, and those technology pieces on their own are nice, but it's when you combine them with the cultural change and not just like, oh, hey, I'm playing with some GitOps things, but fundamentally I can shift what I'm doing, take advantage of things that automate and allow software to drive a lot of my business, and my team can actually be even more valuable because I take some of the thing off the plate that I might have been manually dealing with before.
Yeah, I think at Deloitte, what we try to do is be a holistic, trusted advisor. And so in other words, understand the bigger picture in terms of how all these piece parts fit in. And then once you figure out the bigger picture and also understanding the cultural transformations need to occur, able to put together kind of a task list and a plan to make that happen. One of the things that I do when I meet with a client initially, and we're looking at a problem like this and assessing as to whether or not we can help them, is really kind of look at the as-is state of the culture and what we're looking to do. And so in many instances, and you hit the nail on the head, Stu, they have huge aspirations and how they want to take technology to the next level. And by the way, in many instances, that comes down from the C-suite, comes down from the board of directors, comes down from the investors, that we want to get on this technological train, whether it's DevOps, cloud-based computing, edge computing, multi-cloud, all these sorts of things. But without that cultural buy-in, it's going to be very difficult to make that happen. In many instances, I have some very tough conversations with folks that we need to focus on the cultural transformation here. Every bit that we're focusing on the digital transformation, it needs to occur. And people are kind of taken back by that. But the reality is, if we don't do that, at the end of the day, Deloitte, Red Hat, people who are building technological solutions, they're going to throw the keys to their customers and their clients, and they're the ones who are going to need to drive the solution ongoing. And if they don't have that cultural transformation to make it happen, it's just going to fail. And the last thing I want to do is a lot of work for a lot of folks to build a very significant system if they're going to be unable to, in essence, drive it and basically operate it, as they do moving forward. So it's the ability to have those tough assessments where you are looking at all angles of culture and technology and the ability to adopt change, the ability to, operate at the speed of need for the customers, maybe some latency that's going on, security requirements, you just mentioned those, and the ability to kind of, take this technology and apply it where it needs to be applied. And those are really probably more important than the technology conversation. Sometimes I think I should have gotten a psychology degree rather than a computer science degree. I'd probably be doing better.
Yeah, David, I agree with you 1,000%. I always say, if I hadn't been an engineering major, I would have liked to do psychology. I've got a daughter who's a psych major now, so I'll just have to pick her brain and get some more pieces on that. Here, before we get into the last case study, I got another question for you because, I think back, you remember outsourcing, one of the big lessons we learned from outsourcing was we're like, oh, hey, I'm going to do my mess for less. But I didn't really understand how things were managed, and I lost a connection with how I could change the dials or be able to move things forward. one of the biggest challenges in the cloud era that we see is trying to understand, what do I actually need to work on and what shouldn't I do? Earlier in my career, how many times did we work with companies as they rolled out things like, email and CRM, and now these are things that I just consume. When I look at the cloud, there's hundreds of services out there. There are certain things that you want your team to know, and other things where, hey, why are you spending the time and effort and toil on that? There are other offerings that we can, from an OpenShift standpoint, it's like, hey, Kubernetes is awesome, and we need lots of people to know it, but your developers shouldn't have to think about the container and Kubernetes world. You want them focused on their application. How do we work on kind of the education and the what's differentiated and what do you need to know about versus what can you just shift to your partners and software solutions?
Yeah, on our teams, we reward people for looking for OPW, other people's work. And really in the cloud, we can outsource a great deal of things that we used to do in building our own data centers. And we still have clients that want to build their own Kubernetes stack and that want to assemble the thing out of raw open source things and do so before it goes downstream to a company like Red Hat that's able to take it and make it much more usable than trying to do it yourself. And it's really a matter of doing that to find success, because you're not going to be successful if you're not able to do that. Lots of people like to build things. There's still kind of a non-invented here attitude, and certainly people have pushed back on cloud because of that. I'm not going to trust another provider to deal with my database technology, my processing technology, or in this case, a federated Kubernetes clusters, which OpenShift does extremely well. And you're not necessarily taking advantage of the technologies that are going to take things to the next level. And by the way, you're going to choose to fail because you're not going to be able to keep up with the R&D operations and the investments that are being made by the technical providers. So we still see this today, and I always wonder why I see it. What's the motivation of someone wanting to do that? And the reality is that we have a tendency to want to craft our own solutions down to the detail. I even do that when I work around the house and, fixing bicycles and things like that. I want to, jigger things instead of buying new systems. So I'll spend 20 hours in doing something and building something where it's a $10 part that I could put in there. So we need to get out of this mentality. The reality is that 90% of the systems and the technologies that we deploy are going to be built on other people's technology and other people's work. Our ability as architects is not necessarily to define how we're going to build and rebuild these systems, but the ability to assemble and configure technology in such a way where it's going to be able to solve the problems ultimately. And that's where the focus needs to be, because I see technologies being in inefficient ways. And the reality is, if we do that, we're going to build a certain amount of inefficiency in the system. It's going to cost millions of dollars a month to operate these systems versus doing it the right way and leveraging the right technology. So if you're unsure, get the right guidance, research the stuff, look at where the architectural patterns are being, look at who's successful with the technology, such that the case studies are going over here. Focus on what they did, and you'll see each and every time they didn't build the thing from scratch. They built the thing by configuring other people's technology, and that's how you take things to the next level.
Yeah, David, but by the way, so we take that response that you just gave, we're going to write a blog on it, and I'm going to title it, "It's the Dark Side of the Ikea Effect." So Harvard Business Review talked about something, anybody that's ever bought furniture from Ikea, part of it is I helped build that. And so therefore you're invested in it. So right, there's certain things, you talked about like bicycles, right? Any of us that have bikes, I add on, I tweak, and I adjust that. And part of it is like, I've made it mine. One of the greatest sins we had at the data center is everybody loved their geek knobs. So I want to be able to adjust things every way I want. When I go to the cloud, there's an opportunity for me to, do I need to be able to get things exactly the way that I want, or can I spend my time and effort somewhere else? As an industry as a whole, we know for a long time, it's like, okay, how much time do you spend on, care, feeding, maintenance, keeping the lights on activities? That's traditionally been, 70% or more of my time. I want to be able to flip that script and say, I want to focus on, new things. I need security initiatives. I need to, respond to the needs of the business. So flipping that, and it's great that you want to understand and tweak things, but is that the best use of your time? There's certain things I should be able to adjust. The database world has seen, a flipping of that. Rather than that one database that everybody worked on, I have smaller databases that meet the needs of what I have that I can just buy off the shelf and use in those SaaS environments. So part of that's an education problem, and that brings us to, I love the global diversity we've had in the use cases. We started in the United States, we went to the UK, we're going to go around to the end of winter now in New Zealand to talk about EdPay, an education payer company who's an Azure company in New Zealand. So why don't you tell us a little bit about our third and final case study?
Yeah, this company managed payroll services for New Zealand and 2,500 schools. And I had no idea there were that many schools in New Zealand, but there are. And they were able to replace something that was inefficient. It was time-consuming manual processing, for 14,000 biweekly submissions. And they created a digital payroll application called EdPay. And it's able to work with local systems integrators at Deloitte through New Zealand, help them build this system and deploy this system and operate this system. And again, scalability, again, reliability, and they're able to basically weaponize the Red Hat technologies to kind of take things to the next level. So this is an example of something that needed to be done, extremely important. Obviously, you want to make the payrolls out there for those various systems. And the application now supports nearly a real-time status information, zero downtime updates, enhanced feature and capabilities are built into the system. So this is basically a case where an existing process was modernized and was improved moving forward. And the ability to, again, take the customer access experience to the next level. And so they're able to use apps and the ability to, in essence, communicate directly with the people who are going to receive the paychecks or the payroll people who receive the pay, and understand exactly where it's coming from, and the ability to communicate and interact with that thing. And I don't know, I have great experiences here at Deloitte, but in the past, working for some other large organizations, your ability to kind of figure out, how to get your paycheck deposited into a different account, or your ability to kind of take things to the next level, or even dealing with 401 errors and trying to get to certain websites and make things happen, incredibly frustrating. So this is an example where the technology again was following behind the problem. So when you look at this thing, they realized that this was going to be something that had to be solved. They had a scalability issue they couldn't yet obtain, and then leveraging the right technology to make it happen. And scalability, the ability to have technology that's pre-done, be able to adapt to the particular needs that we're looking at. That's why we picked Red Hat, is the ability to do that. And Deloitte made it happen with that technology. So this is a win-win situation all the way in New Zealand, which is a country I'd love to visit someday.
Yeah, David, I think absolutely they need to fly you and me down there to do a follow-up on it. I would love to visit also. And you're right. There's so many times you mentioned big companies, and there's certain things like, the tool that I use for expenses. I hear so many of my friends out there just complaining to the social media universe about boy, this process stinks. Here we are in 2022. We have wonderful tools available. If an education payroll system can embrace DevOps and enable all of these, it's a great testament to what we as an industry as a whole should be able to move forward, be able to leverage the technology to be able to ultimately have the users of the technology have a good experience, because that's the this whole hey, you need to change your applications and modernize, and there's wonderful tech. The challenge is there's too many technologies that you just look at it and say, hey, that was developed last century, and the way I interact with it and the way I get and pull information from it is so slow and broken that it just doesn't work well with today's world, where I want to interface with my mobile device. I want to be able to tie it into you mentioned things like financial things. I should be able to pull things to my, bank or financial service of choice, and have visibility across all of these things. And, yeah, of course, there's certain, security and governance things that we need to worry about, but hopefully it's not just a legacy technology or mindset that's holding us back.
Yeah, what kind of jumped out at me with these use cases, and this one specifically, is the fact of the matter is it actually reduced human participation into the operational process. And so that means they're able to do more with less money. So this is one of those things where the technology, and we saw this in some of the couple of the other use cases as well, was able to pay for itself in a very short period of time. I think this one was like 6 months, where ultimately reduced the number of phone calls that were coming into a call center to deal with payroll issues, the ability to deal with people who are troubleshooting issues, and they really kind of enabled the customers, in this case, the people who were receiving the paychecks, to enable themselves to solve many of the issues at the same time, and gave them the tools to make it happen. And people are like, well, that's great in doing that, but that's going to cost us too much money. The reality is it doesn't, because you're removing some of the operational overhead of having people answer phone calls, and even turnover you get if people think that you're monkeying with their paychecks. That's kind of a primary reason I think people may move on and churn into other places. So this is one of those things where valuing you as an employee, we put a priority in terms of your paycheck experience. We provide you with the tools. You're able to enable this and deal with this in real time. It's completely automated. It's completely digital into itself. You're not going to have to pick up the phone and call anybody. It's all problems that we're able to solve, either chat or we solve automatically. And the problems are, maybe the problems don't occur in the first place. And so through all this automation and all this leveraging of technology, that's a component that's often overlooked. So in other words, we're looking at the innovation benefits of, some of the stuff we're building within enterprises. We're trying to give the innovators the best breed technology to take things to the next level. But the reality is, removing the drudgery and the pain that comes from dealing with a lot of these systems, which we still deal with today, has a huge amount of upside, even beyond the human beings you're saving, the amount of pay, people you have to have on the payroll to answer the phone calls. The ability to have a better culture, more positive culture, and deal with the fact that we care about you enough that we're able to enable you and provide you the technology for you to be successful. And that's something that's kind of an underpinning of all this stuff.
Yeah, well, David, I mean, obviously you're preaching to the choir with me on this. What I wonder is, have we gotten past some of those hurdles? And what I mean by that is, I need to spend some money. I need to adopt some new technology, which is going to require some, retraining, some skill learning. There might be some new people that come in, and the ultimate savings, some of these cases, it was like, hey, I got much more adoption and that made sense. But some of it is, hey, the people that are working on this are going to be able to shift what they're working on and hopefully have a better work environment. It should be better for them, but it's soft savings rather than that. Or the afterglow of the ultimate end user of the technology or the service there is tough to quantify. So, how do the dollars and cents sort out for the adoption of this technology? Have we gotten to the point that people understand? Do we have enough of these, use cases where, here we're talking, government agencies aren't always the first bleeding edge companies to do this. And when you have some of these success stories, we hope that pretty much anybody in any industry should be like, hey, this isn't just marketing fluff or people trying to push these technologies. These are real world results that made this, better results that I had that justified the upfront spend.
Yeah, it's hard value versus soft value, and both are important. Hard value is easy to define because it's cost savings and productivity improvements and all the stuff easy to measure. But you're getting to the soft values that are much more difficult to define, but much more important. Our ability to create a culture for innovation by providing best of breed technology, our ability to serve a customer better, and therefore increase the ability to maintain that customer and actually grow the revenue from that particular customer. Also, and people don't realize this, the ability to automate things internally to allow folks within your company to do better and not have as much latency. People who implemented CRM systems back in the 90s, they realized rather quickly that their sales went up, even though the number of salespeople did not increase. And the reality is that it was much easier and much less friction to make a sale and to serve a customer and to make sure we're dealing with that customer correctly. Customer management systems, all these sorts of things. Those are much more difficult to define, but I urge people to make that distinction. And so in other words, look at your soft values and be able to define what's important to your company, and then put a monetary value associated with that. And so, in other words, if we're building a better sales order management system that's externally facing and therefore facing customers, is it going to be able to save more money? Is it going to be able to generate more revenue because they're able to maintain customers because we have a better customer experience? If you look at all the retail systems out there, basically selling a lot of the same stuff for the same price, yet few of them are successful, few of them are not so successful, and that's because they provide a better customer experience. They understand that the margins are going to be completely low, and their ability to do that is going to take things to the next level. Well, that has a huge amount of upside that needs to be measured. And your ability to retain employees, your ability to even improve a culture, your ability to deal with automation of systems, reduce the uptime, all these sorts of things are things that people don't consider. So they always look at the cost of, implementing the technology, that it's going to cost us, $1 million more a year, and it's going to be another 10% to operate the technology. However, the upside is we're going to have $500,000 that comes back to the business every month because of this value we're able to build into the systems. And that should be monetized. That should be understood. And that's something I think we often overlook.
Yeah, and you highlighted it before also, though, the employee experience and the customer experience, sometimes quantifying that's tough, but that is so important. We've worked with so many companies that not only hiring, it will help you if you're working on some of these more interesting things, but from a retention standpoint, most people aren't looking to be like, hey, I've maintained some system for 10 years and yeah, I'm okay doing that for the next 5. Okay, you give me a challenge, you give me an opportunity, you give me room to grow. That should be something that, most people are looking forward to. All right, so I love the case studies. In your role, you said you look a lot out as to kind of the emerging groups there. So, I'd love to hear, what are the things that you see that you say like, hey, this is really something that's catching on? And is there any of the conversations that you're getting questioned a lot about that you're like, no, I'm not seeing real world implementation. Maybe we need to, wait a couple of years before we're really ready for that kind of conversation?
Yeah, I think it's probably the meta cloud, super cloud thing. We're defining something that basically exists logically, and it may exist as a buzzword, and there may be some informal implementations that people kind of are calling this thing. But that should be something that's going to be a work in process for a few more years. I think it's going to be the biggest growth opportunity for the cloud space, from here, probably for the next 5 to 7 years. And the reality is people are implementing multi-cloud. And I always say, if you're not planning for multi-cloud, it's coming for you. It's going to happen no matter what, because very much like cloud computing in general, if it's not supported by IT, people are going to be adopting it whether they know it or not. And what's driving multi-cloud is moving into best of breed technologies that people need to build their systems. And so in other words, they want to be the most innovative, they want to be the most creative, they want to have the best technology. Sometimes that may be another hyperscaler than the one you have a partnership with that you're currently implementing, that's your current standard within IT. And so whether you know it or not, suddenly these very complex cloud environments are going to be there. And also IT, whether you know it or not, if you think back to the shadow cloud stuff, that's going to be dumped back on your door, and you're going to have to maintain those things. So embrace it moving forward and start looking at the infrastructure that is going to be built in between these various hyperscalers to get complexity under control, to get heterogeneity under control, and also understand the fact we're not going to be able to quadruple the amount of operation spending that occurs. We're going to have to be able to limit it within a certain reasonable amount of spending. And that does not mean we're going to limit your ability to adopt technology. The ability to adopt technology, the right technology, best of breed technology, should always be there. You're going to have to build the infrastructure around that to make it happen. That's the biggest growth thing right now. And I think that people who are deploying multi-clouds, they may have multi-clouds by default, but they may not necessarily understand what it's going to take to do the infrastructure planning around that. That's why it's great, having a partnership with Red Hat. I mean, if you look at some of the federated, Kubernetes platforms, the ability to have platforms that run above these various hyperscalers, which really kind of are designed to run in the middle, that do, great things using whatever resources that need to be leveraged. In other words, they're abstracting up from the existing providers and providing some choice in making that happen. that's probably going to be the way we're looking to go, because that technology is going to be key moving forward. We're going to have this heterogeneity, which is going to be abstracted, this complexity, which is going to be abstracted. And where we're going to build and deploy applications is going to be at this layer that's going to exist across clouds, that's going to leverage whatever service that we happen to have there. And it could be a legacy service, it could be an old LAMP stack that we have sitting in our data centers, and we're not necessarily going to move mainframe systems. Hyperscalers, all the major hyperscalers that are out there, and that's certainly where most people are putting them today, but also edge-based systems and running things on IoT. I mean, we have Kubernetes clusters that run on Raspberry Pis, which are very small computers, that sit close to a factory floor, and thousands of them run at the same time. And your ability to make these things work and play well together, to provide core integration where you're not increasing the complexity, where you're not increasing the number of services, where you're certainly increasing the breadth of technology and the technology you're leveraging, but not the complexity around it, is going to be the biggest challenge. That's something I think people aren't necessarily aware of. They may be aware of it in some aspect, but that should be hugely on their radar screen today as an enterprise, because if you embrace it now and you plan for it now, you're going to be able to leverage that to a huge advantage to get to the values we talked about, both the hard values, productivity savings, things like that, but also the soft values, your ability to react and respond, your ability to be on the innovative curve because you're able to weaponize best-of-breed technology to take things to the next level. You're able to build applications in between various cloud services out there, and your ability to finally get to a point where it's going to have the ultimate scalability, the ultimate flexibility, and your ability to do whatever you need to do within your business to make your business successful. And that's the role of IT, right?
Yeah, I think you framed it up so well. I wrote an ebook last year talking about, customers have ended up in this kind of environment by accident. It was either through an acquisition or, you bring me back to the early days of cloud, where it was the stealth IT. I would talk to a room of people and say, okay, how many of you are using AWS? And, 2/3, 3/4 raise their hand. And I'd say, okay, the rest of you, do you mind if we do a quick IP search and find how many Amazon accounts you have running in your environment? Because we all have some Amazon accounts there. So we need to go from by accident to by design and architecturally. And there's a lot of engineering work. When I look at, say, a peer of ours in the industry, to Red Hat is HashiCorp. And when I talk to them, the amount of engineering effort to not just, we don't just sit above these environments, but we actually work and make sure that, in an Amazon environment, there's, 167 different services that work well with our environment, because our service that we jointly engineer with Amazon sits on top of EC2 and makes it easy for you to still take advantage of those pieces, because you don't want to just say, oh, hey, Amazon came out with some new service. Does that work in the environment that I set up? It can't be a least common denominator. Kind of the early days of PaaS didn't allow you to do this. Containers and Kubernetes changed it a lot, but there's a lot more that goes into it. It's something that, as you said, we've been working at Red Hat for a long time to live in all of these environments, and definitely something that, like the wave that you're talking about, something we're definitely looking to work closely with companies like Deloitte to help customers go from the by accident to a proper strategy to take advantage. It's something I talk about, you talked about too, is you want to be able to unlock that innovation that is available in these cloud ecosystems, in these edge environments, in all of these new things.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
I think one of the things that I just want to stress is that we're not displacing the hyperscalers. We're enabling us to use them in a much more effective way. And so, in fact, that's probably going to increase their use moving forward. So we're going to be more dependent on hyperscalers, but our ability to leverage abstraction and deal with complexity mediation, those sorts of things built into it, is going to allow us to kind of take our hyperscaler game to the next level. We're not having to build little silos of systems in a walled garden as the ability to deal with that hyperscaler. We're able to deal it with cross-cloud services that reduce a lot of the redundancy and reduce the complexity. Therefore, it's going to make us more effective with those services.
Yeah. Once again, we are in complete agreement on that. From a Red Hat standpoint, I don't think anybody ever thought that Red Hat, should be competing with the cloud providers. We've got deep partnership with the cloud providers. Even if you look at our friends at IBM, they signed an agreement with AWS earlier this year, and they're actually leveraging the the partnership that we have with Amazon to deploy their SaaS offerings into the public clouds, and we're doing more there. So yeah, absolutely, strong commitment to, what do you do at Deloitte? You help customers, with their applications and modernize. When it makes sense, Red Hat's underneath that. We drive more workloads to the public cloud. So it is one of those force multipliers, as you said, 1 + 1 + 1 equals, greater than 3, and ultimately good benefit for the end users themselves. All right. Let me give you the final word. You write. I've been watching you, speaking in videos, speaking at conferences. You're all over the place, talking with a lot of customers too. So final word as to where people can learn more and what you've got going on.
Yeah, check out the OnCloud podcast. I've been doing that for the last 5 years at Deloitte. You can check that out wherever you get your podcasts. Also, the blog on InfoWorld. I post there twice a week. Lots of writing and speaking events coming up. Check it out. Also go to Deloitte.com and look at our cloud complexity management offering, and also look at our consulting offering, what we do within cloud engineering. It's important work. We operate as a trusted advisor. We're here to help you and love to have a conversation with you.
David, let me tell you, there's one question in the chat before we wrap. If you can answer it, great. If not, we'll take it. But it says, what's your thoughts around the UK shutting down their PaaS, affecting public strategy? I'm not as, do you know what specifically they're talking about there?
Yeah, I think that goes to some regulatory things, or the reason that they shut it down. I mean, these sorts of things are going to happen within different environments, and they're going to move from different platforms to platforms, based on the requirements changing and security parameters changing. And so I never get worried about stuff like that, because the reality is you're leveraging dozens of different technologies and at least 3-4 different cloud providers. So if they're shutting down their PaaS for some reason, that means they're moving over to another service, hopefully because they feel that other service is going to provide a better value for what they're looking to do. So these things are going to be dynamic, ongoing, and they're going to be ever changing. So I wouldn't worry about it.
Wonderful. Well, David, pleasure as always to catch up with you. Thank you for walking us through, these customer case studies, as we said in the chat. And if you look online, you can read much more about them. David is very easy to reach, also on the social media channels, as am I. Quick programming note, we've got a couple of shows coming up. So I will be doing previews for the KubeCon show in 2 weeks. We also have Ansible Fest coming up. I will be doing that the week after that. So September 22nd and the 29th, I believe, are there. And on a final note for the show, I wanted to just give a huge shout out to the producer who's been helping out for this show since I took it over. Stephanie, thank you so much. Nicole, and the rest of the team that helps put together In the Clouds. Thank you for all that you've been helping on here. Just a little bit of changes what we're doing internally here, but the show will keep plugging on as usual. So please do reach out if you have questions about what we're talking about. If there's other people we should be speaking to, please let us know. I will be speaking at the aforementioned KubeCon show, but we'll get into much more of that when we do the preview. So thank you, David. Thank you for everybody for watching, and thank you for joining us on your journey in the clouds.